Hello everyone, it's Kanan,
It's Jesse.
and we're the Geeky Saying Couple, and welcome back to another episode of Mysterious Darkness. It's a perfect night for it. It's
Thunderstorm, lightning,
thunderstorm,
tornado
lightning,
warnings.
and it's after midnight and all that. So I mean, this is a prime night to talk about some horrible, creepy stuff. So we got a lot to cover with tonight's topic. Little announcement. If you've got anything that you want to say, I will. Any of our subscribers or viewers who love my horror game Let's Play series and you're wondering why I have not been doing it here recently, I got a new computer and I'm waiting for it to get here. So I've kind of put the series on a hold right now just until it gets here. Hopefully you don't have to worry about lag or anything anymore because it was a pretty expensive computer. I should be able to play almost anything I want to. I still need to get a capture card to play stuff off my consoles. But yeah, I should have it this upcoming week, hopefully. It's still not shipped though, but it's supposed to be here by the 29th. I've also got a second monitor to go with it, so yeah, really excited for that. So hopefully a major upgrade in Let's Plays. So that's really the only thing I had to say. You got anything about commissions or anything?
Um, I mean, it's still open, still accepting. I mean,
Still getting a ton every day.
yeah. There is more cosplay videos coming. It's been kind of slow, I know. But with trying to transition into, now all the masks that I've been making, the shoes I've been making, and I'm actually currently transforming my area into something more easier to access, easier to record, because the space I have to record makes things a little difficult. It's really kind of small. If you've seen any of the videos so far, I mean, I make it work, but yeah, they're coming. I'm working on it. I also have a really big contact review. There's also a link for anyone that needs contacts in the description as well.
And we're also, like, along with hers, we're actually going to start making a little space for me to do my Let's Plays and all that. So, yeah, we're changing things around. But videos that feature both of us is still going to be like this.
And, well, we may do it as a video just because we're actually building Luna a doghouse. So, you'll probably get at least a video of that so you can get some of her. She's a troublemaker, so we need to keep her out of things, so we're building a doghouse.
Okay, so I think that's all the little announcements we were going to make. So tonight's episode is about serial killer Jane Toppan. Now, a lot of people have not heard of her. I
hadn't until you told me about her a long time ago.
Yeah, because I told her that this woman pretty much creeped me out. She's the only single serial killer that has ever creeped me out. Like Dahmer, Bundy, Zodiac Killer, all those. I can listen to stuff about them all night and not get creeped out. But I first heard about her, a long time ago. I had gotten a DVD set it was like a 2 DVD set from Walmart called America's Serial Killers. And the reason why I got it is because I was a psychology student. I'm a psychology major. That's what my degree is in. And I had planned on being a forensic psychologist. That's pretty much the people that the FBI or police force call in to talk to deranged killers or serial killers and all that, and find out, if they're legally insane, if they're not. Yeah, well, that dream obviously didn't happen, but in this video, it covered the basics. It went from Jack the Ripper all the way to Ted Bundy, the BTK killer, Jeffrey Dahmer, Zodiac Killer, all of them. But it included also Jane Toppan, and I had never heard of her, and it's funny because just looking at pictures of her, she was very creepy looking to me. But the music that's played in this show and the the narrator, every time he quotes one of the killers, he tries to sound like them. So his little
Interpretation.
of her, I don't know, it just creeped me out. But then again, apparently I'm one of the only ones that found it creepy because the picture they used of her, one of my nephews said that she looked like Jay Leno. So, yeah, so obviously she's not that creepy to some. But yeah, this she was out there. She's quoted to have said that her ambition was to kill more people, more helpless people than any man or woman who had ever lived. So yeah, she was out for the blood pretty much, but she didn't kill Bloody. Um, well, let's get into the story here. We'll get into the meat of this. We've got a lot of ground to cover. Okay. Also, this writing that I am pretty much going to be reading from is by Ciaran Conleaf. So sorry if I butchered that. We will include the article as a credit in the description, so if you do want to read this, you can. But let's get to it. So she was born as Honora Kelly in Boston, and it's still kind of speculated when she was actually born. Most say it was 1857, but it could have been as early as 1854. She was the child of two Irish immigrants named Peter and Bridget. She preferred to be called Nora, and she was the youngest of at least three daughters, with her sister Delilah being 2 years older, and at least one other older sister named Nellie. Nora's mother, Bridget, she died of tuberculosis, TB, which, back then that was, if you got TB back then, it was pretty much a death sentence. When she was only a few years old, leaving Peter, the father, to raise them on his own. Peter was a tailor. He was also an alcoholic who may have suffered some form of mental illness. So we're already getting to some red flags here very early. His abusive manner gave him the nickname of Kelly the Crack, which did not mean he was a fun party animal, but rather he was cracked in the head. It was probably a miserable childhood for Bridget, and by 1860, Peter's abuse had become enough that she and Delilah were taken away from him and put into the care of the Boston Female Asylum. Okay, that must have been a typo because it used their mother's name. Their elder sister, Nellie, was old enough to make her own way. It's pretty much like, you're 18 or whatever. You can
go off on your own.
Yeah. Though apparently, like her father, she also suffered from mental illness and was eventually committed to an asylum. So yeah. Urban legend has it that Peter suffered a psychotic break and tried to sew his own eyelids shut. And his ultimate fate to this day is unknown. So, we've already maybe have a form of mental illness that is hereditary, that maybe is some kind of genetic defect that passes from, seems like, the father to the children. Now, this will play in a little bit later to what kind of theory people used to use in Topin's story. So yes, they were sent to the Boston Female Asylum, which was an orphanage founded in 1799. And this was long before the idea of state care for children was invented. So it was left to charity of the generous to act as a social safety net, pretty much. So you just had to rely on people donating money. In fact, the BFA was the first charity ever established by women in Boston. Originally, it had been set up to care for orphan girls between the ages of 3 and 10. So I guess that means once you turn 10 years old, they didn't care about you anymore. But it soon expanded its mission to include children from broken homes like Nora and Delia. How's that pronounced?
Delia.
Delia. Okay, I was going to make sure I was pronouncing that right. There was around 100 girls in the BFA in 1860, though not all stayed until they reached the regulation of 10 years. Nora left the asylum in 1862, age 8. She was fostered out as an indentured servant to a widow named Anne Toppan. Now, and the last name is pronounced Toppan. I like Tobin better. I think Toppan kind of sounds funny. As with Nellie and Peter, how'd you say? Delia. Delia's fate is uncertain, though the stories go that she wasn't lucky enough to find a place like Nora and instead was driven to become a prostitute to survive. So yeah, even back then, just kids were kind of treated like once they reached a certain age like an adult.
Apparently 10.
Yeah, apparently 10 years old.
Whereas nowadays it's 18.
Yeah, once you turn 18, you could just easily just disappear pretty much. Comparatively, Nora was the lucky one to have been placed with the Toppans. Old Anne Toppan didn't like the Irish, an attitude which she did her best to instill in Nora. In fact, she was the one who changed her name to the much less Gaelic-sounding Jane. She told everyone that Jane was Italian, a ruse which was helped by the fact that Jane was one of the... now this is... Okay. Black Irish. This term refers to a recessive strain of dark hair and olive Mediterranean-style skin, which pops up in many Irish families. So, yeah, I didn't want people to think I was using racist language there. Jane was raised alongside Anne's daughter Elizabeth, though she was never allowed to forget her place in the pecking order. Sounds like that was kind of that was in every family back then. Unlike many girls in similar situations, she was never formally adopted into the Toppans. Though Elizabeth at least does seem to have treated her well, Jane was sent to school by Anne, though she was not a very popular child. She was and it seems like since she didn't have that much knowledge about her adoptive family, she just made up all these wild tales about them. Worse though, she was a snitch. She was a rat. She told tales on her classmates, which then lent her credence when she blamed them for her own misdeeds. So she was a troublemaker who blamed others. And she spread vicious gossip about anyone who crossed her, or anyone popular she didn't like. Sounds like an old version of Mean Girls in a way. And it's not surprising that she made no real friends during her time at school. I wonder why. I'm surprised she didn't get beat up almost every day. Now, on her 18th birthday, Jane was freed from her indenture and given $50, which back then, that was probably a lot of money.
Yeah.
That was probably enough to go out and just have fun. Well, not have fun with, but, actually buy a good amount of stuff for yourself. She stayed with the Toppans, though, as a live-in servant for over a decade. So she stayed with them as a live-in servant for over a decade, even though she was freed from her indentured servitude. Anne Toppan passed away sometime in the 1870s, and a few years later, Elizabeth married a deacon named Ormel Brigham. Boy, what a name. We sure he didn't end up killing some people? Because my gosh, I bet he got made fun of for that one. Damn. Hormel. That sounds like Hormel chili or something like that. Jane herself was apparently engaged at one point, but her fiance had left her for another woman.
Wow.
Whew.
Well, that list of
Yeah.
things is
Yeah.
adding up there.
Yeah, I've actually read. The video that I have actually stated that after that happened, that's where she kind of changed a little bit, and she was also supposed to have said that if she had gotten married and had kids, she might not have killed all these people because she would have been tending to her children and her husband. I don't know how true that is, because you'll see that this woman really didn't care who she killed. She stayed on working for her foster sister until 1885, when she finally decided that she needed to leave and make a life for herself. There were few professions open to women in those days, which we all know, and most were menial at best. Jane thought better of herself than that, and so she decided to go for one of the most challenging and most rewarding options available. In 1887, she applied to and was accepted by the nursing school at Cambridge Hospital in Boston. So, here's a big difference between her and other serial killers. Did her foster family probably treat her well? No, but they didn't, treat her very badly either, it seems like. Also, she thought highly of herself. She had confidence that she wanted to do better for herself. So she sounds like, how a lot of women in those days did. They wanted something better for themselves than the menial job that only women were given. So she, of course, went into nursing. So she doesn't have that. A lot of serial killers, when they're children, they're like.
There's signs.
Well, yeah. I mean, definitely the mental illness that's apparently running in her family is a sign. But they're beaten down so much by society at some point to where they just snap pretty much, and they decide that they're going to do what they want to do, and they're going to let their fantasies run wild. She so far doesn't show that. This could almost be just any other woman in that time story of how she became a success, almost. This is just the way that's being said. Now, of course, her being a snitch and her doing stuff and blaming on others, but that's... Who hasn't done that?
Yeah. Besides
you, probably. Because you're a goody two-shoes. So she actually had the mindset that when she was in school, she knew that she was disruptive and gossipy, and that she was well aware, in retrospect, that this had made her no friends. Nursing school was a chance to reinvent herself. Now, see,
it seems like she's going on the right track.
Yeah, almost. But... Yeah, it seems like she wants to make better of herself. And she did so well enough that she soon acquired the nickname of Jolly Jane. She preferred Jenny, and that's what most people called her. So that's what we'll refer to her throughout the whole entire thing is Jenny. The life of a trainee nurse was hard, working 7 12-hour days a week with only 2 weeks of holiday a year. Compared to the life of a domestic servant, though, it was interesting and challenging in ways that Jenny could only have dreamed of. She bore it all without complaint, a stoicism that, along with her bubbly demeanor, won her several friends. Of course, she was still given to spreading gossip and integrating herself with authority, just a bit more discreetly. On at least 2 occasions, she made up a rumor about someone who crossed her that resulted in the woman being expelled from the school. She herself was no angel, and suspicion of petty theft drifted about her during her time in the hospital. No proof ever materialized, though. Now, apparently later, when she actually got into a hospital and all that, still, She had, you know, was very well liked by people at work, but late at night she would go to bars and drink beer and talk crap about everyone she worked with. So we're getting like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of scenario going here. Jenny was a favorite among the patients with her bright and vivacious demeanor. She liked them as well, though in a slightly disturbing way. Later investigations show that she may have deliberately falsified some records in order to prolong the stay of those she got along particularly well with. She might even have dosed them with the wrong medication in order to make them sicker, though nobody would have suspected Jolly Jane of such behavior. So now we're getting a little bit into the dark side. And there have been a lot of reports of nurses doing that, making patients sicker because they've gotten some kind of fascination with them. And of course, you've got the ones who make patients sicker and then bring them back out of it to make themselves look good. That's happened several times. The one sour note in this persona was her attitude towards the elderly patients in her care. She often commented that there was no use in keeping them alive, something which people at the time chose to take as a joke. It wasn't. By Jenny's own count, she killed at least a dozen people during her time as a student nurse. How the hell do you get away with killing a dozen people when you're just a student? How? I know.
Back then?
Well, yeah, I mean, back then, but my God, like, you would think people would at least be
start noticing a pattern when the same nurse is tending to those people.
Unless she did it in the middle of the night when everybody's supposed to be asleep. I don't know. She had a passion for pharmacology and began her career as a poisoner by secretly dosing her patients with opium in order to see for herself the effects that the drug would have on them. So she's kind of performing experiments on them, pretty much. She's kind of like, ooh, how much will this take? Soon she realized that she enjoyed watching them suffer, and the first time one died, she was in ecstasy. When the death wasn't treated as suspicious, she began to escalate her activities, mixing atropine, which is a drug derived from belladonna. Seems Ruby follows us wherever we go. With morphine, ensured the most delightful convulsions and terror in her patients. I'm getting goosebumps just reading that. Like, this woman is literally like poisoning her patients and getting the jollies out of watching them die. The fact that morphine contracts the pupils of the eyes while atropine expands them meant that neither symptom would be visible, and the mixture of other symptoms left the doctors who tried to figure out what was wrong with the patients utterly perplexed. So even the doctors weren't even on clue on what was going on. The vegetable nature of the poisons also helped to mask them from the analytical techniques of the time, and she even took advantage of her activities to enhance her own reputation by bringing patients to the brink of death and then nursing them back to health in a miraculous recovery. Okay, this woman is nuts.
Insane.
Yes. She, but it seems like there's no real indication so it seems like maybe she tried to poison one of them to bring them back to make herself look good, but then when they died, she just and she just watched it. I guess
something just clicked. Whatever was wrong already, something just clicked.
They just, God, maybe it was getting jilted at the altar. I don't know, but that's creepy. By the time she finished her training, Jenny had enough of a good reputation to secure a post at the prestigious Massachusetts General Hospital, and she was good enough at her job that initially she was on the first fast track to promotion. So apparently she was a good nurse. She could have made a really good living out of this. However, this was a tighter ship than Cambridge had been, and she soon got a reputation for taking the credit that others were due. Her tampering with medical records was also detected much more often, though it was put down to incompetence and overeagerness rather than malice. Nobody suspected that she was still secretly torturing and murdering patients with chemical concoctions. One of these patients, named Amelia Finney, survived. She later told a story of Jenny getting into bed with her as she was racked with convulsions. Jenny stroked her and kissed her face, telling her that it would all be all right soon. Before Jenny could give her the fatal dose, she was disturbed and had to flee. The next morning, Amelia thought that it had all been a fever dream, and she would not realize differently until years later. Whew, you talking about being lucky. I was...
God.
And apparently, it'll probably state this later, but apparently she did this with almost all of her victims. She got a sexual thrill out of climbing into bed with them and caressing them as they died. Yeah. Jenny's time at Massachusetts General came to an end in 1890. She had always been a divisive character in the hospital, popular with the doctors for her competence, but gradually less and less popular with her fellow nurses. She was a suspect in a number of petty crimes, such as stealing petty cash and the theft of a patient's diamond ring, even though her more serious crimes were never expected. This must be just the naive way of thinking back in the day. When she made the mistake of leaving the ward without permission, she was pretty much dismissed because of this. Even though she had passed her final exam and qualified for her diploma, she did not receive a license to practice as a nurse. So, yeah, I'm sure that probably made her go downward even more. Jenny worked as a private nurse for a while before returning to Cambridge Hospital to try to obtain her license there. Her prolactivities nearly caught up with her as an attempt to poison a trainee nurse named Maddie Davis was detected by one of the doctors. Another doctor noticed a tendency for convalescing patients to die in Jenny's care, though he blamed it on carelessness in administering medication rather than malice. It was enough to make him let the board know, though, and Jenny's contract was terminated. Once again, she failed to receive her license. With hospital work closed off to her, Jenny decided to go freelance.
Oh, God.
She even said that she'd do better financially. Private nurses actually did get paid more, but they would just lack a steady wage. She'd also lacked the oversight which had impeded her activities in the hospital, though she wouldn't have the steady supply of victims either. Well, that's supposed to be a good thing, but over the next 8 years, as Jane Toppan became one of the most successful private nurses in Boston, she still found time to indulge in her appetite for murder. Okay, so you can tell there was no such thing as resumes or application, there was none of that going on, because if somebody had seen that she had failed to get her license twice, no one would have hired her, I would like to think, because, I don't know, maybe that's just me, I don't know, but, in 1895, Jenny was boarding in Wendell Street in Cambridge with an elderly couple called Israel and Lovey Dunham. Lovey Dunham. She decided that Israel was getting too old, in her words, feeble and fussy, so she killed him, though it was thought to be a heart attack. 2 years later, she sent Lovey to join him. It seemed that Jenny still didn't think there was much point in keeping old people alive. She also killed off more than a few of her elderly patients. In one case, a family complained to a doctor that they thought Jenny had stolen some clothes from their dead grandmother's house. The doctor, just all out defended her as one of the finest women and best nurses he knew. That she had actually killed the old lady never occurred to any of them. What the
God. I just wonder how dumb these people were back then.
Okay, so you're suspecting her of stealing your dead grandmother's clothes, but you don't suspect that she might have killed her first? Oh boy. Okay. In August 1899, Jenny went on holiday in a rented cottage on Cape Cod, something she had been doing for several years. This time, she invited her foster sister Elizabeth to join her. Elizabeth was delighted. She was very fond of Jenny and looked forward to spending some time with her. She had no idea that Jenny despised her. Jenny had always despised her. Since they were children, and old Anne Toppan had made sure that Jenny knew her place in the household. She was the Patty who was lucky to be there, while Elizabeth was the real Toppan. The fact that Elizabeth didn't believe that in the slightest was irrelevant. She was a symbol of Jenny's childhood torment, and so she would have to be snuffed out. So you mean to tell me, the one person in this family who actually liked her, actually cared about her, was actually nice to her, she just saw as the symbol of
torment and everything she went through.
And so she wants to kill her. Given that, it isn't surprising that a few days after Elizabeth arrived in Cape Cod, her husband, Oramel's back, got a telegraph telling him that she was seriously ill. By the time he made it there, she was in a coma. Oh boy. The result, he was told by the doctor, of an apoplectic stroke. Elizabeth never regained consciousness before she died the next morning, with her husband and her foster sister at her bedside. There's just so much messed up about that. If she had, she might have been able to tell them of how Jenny had avidly watched as she convulsed in pain before passing out for the final time, with 30 years of spite and hate in her eyes. Oh, that's cold-blooded. Like, it really is. Shortly after her sister's funeral, Jenny decided it was time to make a move on another scheme she had been working on. For several years, she had been friendly with Myra Connors, the matron of St. John's Theological School at Cambridge. The friendship had an ulterior motive. Of course it did. It even says that, of course. The life of a freelance nurse was a difficult one, and even though it paid well, on the other hand, Mira's job came with an apartment, a maidservant, and a regular paycheck. So, Myra Connors died of a case of I can't pronounce periotonitis that took a decided turn for the worse when her friend Jeannie came to nurse her. So apparently she already, I guess, had some kind of problem, and it got worse after she showed up. And at the funeral, Jenny happened to mention to Myra's boss that it was so sad that Myra died right when she had been planning a sabbatical, and did you know that she had planned to recommend Jenny to fill in for her? God. Oh, man. When the dean offered her Myra's job, Jenny played coy, but eventually declared that she owed it to Myra to take the job. So she killed this woman to get her job, and succeeded. Like, easily. Unfortunately for her, though, this time she had severely misjudged her own competence. Her lax attitude to finances, combined with her lack of experience in management, meant that she was asked to resign after a year. It was a major blow to someone who was utterly convinced of her own superiority. So,
she took what she wanted and didn't realize that she wasn't going to be able to, do it.
Yeah, and that's pretty much
because she wanted the steady paycheck in that life.
Yeah, and that was pretty, that's a crush to the ego right there, big time.
As if she already isn't insane enough.
Jenny consoled herself by returning to the scene of her dearest triumph, the holiday cottage where she had murdered her sister. I have to say, it's just really creepy that some people could go to a place where they've killed someone and just stay there, sleep in it, cook in it, and relax in it. It just, no. It belonged to a man named Alden Davis and his wife Maddie, and they had been renting it out to Jenny since 1896. Since they liked Jenny, they'd given her a good rate, and after the events of 1899, they hadn't felt right asking her for that year's rent. She got out of her rent as well. The next year, in 1900, she had asked for an extension as she didn't have enough on hand to pay for the rent, but when she returned to the cottage again and didn't bother paying then either, Maddie Davis decided to go to Boston and confront her in person. Oh,
That's a mistake.
yeah. Having killed her previous landlords, Jeannie was now boarding with Melvin and Eliza Beadle, who she hadn't killed yet. She had poisoned them at one point, though, enough to make them think that they had food poisoning. When Maddie arrived, Jeannie gave her a glass of water laced with morphine, and then, when Maddie took over poorly, the Beatles were only too happy to let her rest in an empty room. There, Jeannie could easily top up the morphine dose with an injection, enough to send Maddie into a coma. Then, when a doctor arrived, Jeannie, who knew that Maddie was a diabetic, told him that she had eaten a piece of cake when she arrived. The doctor had no reason to suspect anything else, other than why would a woman who knew she was diabetic would
feed her cake?
Would eat a piece of cake. I just... The doctor had no reason to suspect anything, and with a nurse already in the house, he left Maddie at the Beatles in Jenny's care. Jenny played with her for a week, varying the dose so that Maddie had moments of lucidity and could speak to her loved ones before she got bored and ended it all with one last dose. The Davis family closed ranks after Maddie's death, and her two daughters, Genevieve and Minnie, decided to stay with their elderly father for a while. At Maddie's funeral, they made the fatal mistake of asking Jenny to stay on as their house guest for a while. Jenny amused herself for a while by starting fires around the house and then inventing that a stranger she had seen skulking about to blame for them. Okay, so she's a fire starter. That is listed as a serial killer trait, arson. Like a lot. Like it's got to be like, it's almost like serial arson in a way. Eventually, though, her urges returned. Genevieve Gordon, Maddie's daughter, was clearly suffering in her grief. Jenny decided that this was an opportunity and told Minnie, the other daughter, that she had seen Genevieve inspecting a tin of arsenic in the shed. The two women decided to watch Genevieve carefully in case she did something rash. Then Jenny, of course, murdered Genevieve with arsenic. And that's where she kind of screwed up for the first time. You want to know why? Throughout her career, Jenny had steered clear of metallic poisons, as they were too easily detected. This time, though, she had plausible deniability to let her experience a new type of death. The stigma around suicide meant that she didn't have to worry about it being investigated too closely either. Genevieve's official cause of death was recorded as heart disease. 2 weeks later, Alden passed away from grief, given a helping hand by Jenny's morphia. Then, as if driven by a compulsion to complete the set, Jenny murdered Minnie only 4 days later. Grotesquely, since the first dose of morphine left Minnie unable to swallow, Jenny administered the fatal dose.
I don't want to think about that. I just read that myself.
She gave her an enema with morphine. Oh, man. The doctors were baffled and chalked her death up to exhaustion.
How the hell do you get exhaustion out of that? It's just some stupid doctors.
That is awful. So pretty much she killed off the entire Davis family. And of course that's going to cause suspicion. The death of an entire family in the space of a month was notable enough that several papers wrote articles about the unfortunate Davis family. None of them suspected foul play, though one person did, and that was Captain Paul Gibbs, father-in-law to the unfortunate Minnie. He looked back over the events of the month and decided that, though he liked Jenny, everybody did, there was some things she had done that were suspicious. A doctor named Ira Cushing, who was on holiday in the area and who had seen Alden the day before he died, was also sure there was something going on. They got together and decided that something needed to be done, and there was only one man to do it, and that was the Governor of Cuba. Leonard Wood, the U.S. military governor of Cuba at the time, had studied medicine and begun his time in the military as a surgeon, but had swiftly moved over into the officer corps. Together with Teddy Roosevelt, he had formed the famous Rough Riders to fight in the Spanish-American War, and though Teddy got the public glory, it was Leonard who was the actual commanding officer. They got him a generalship and then a post as governor of Cuba. In the summer of 1901, though, he was on holiday in his childhood home of Cape Cod when he was visited by an old family friend, Captain Paul Gibbs. Leonard had both the medical connections and the pull to get a full-scale investigation underway. So, the curtains are starting to close. While the investigation was going on, Jenny paid a visit to her brother-in-law. Oh, Ormel's back. Though this time he's the Reverend Ormel Brigham. In a short space of time, she murdered his sister, doused his food with morphine to make him sick, nursed him back to health in the hope of winning his affections, and then when he rejected her advances, took an overdose of morphine herself. Oh, gosh. Given her experience in medication, it's likely that she calibrated the dose, not to be fatal, but it did land her in the hospital. This was a bit awkward for the detective who was following her as part of the investigation, so he faked an illness himself in order to be admitted. So that's a committed detective. After she was discharged, Jenny went to New Hampshire to visit an old friend named Sarah Nichols. Luckily for Sarah, an autopsy on the exhumed corpse of Minnie Gibbs found evidence of poison. A few weeks after Jenny arrived, so did the police. Sarah was shocked to see her friend taken away, but the arrival of the police almost certainly saved her life, because there was nobody Jenny liked to murder quite so much as her friends. So I'm guessing Ormel, I thought he was going to kick the bucket, but I guess she didn't get him. Who would have thought? Even though Jenny was only arrested for the murder of Minnie Gibbs, the newspaper soon realized that this was only the tip of the iceberg. Boy, there was the rest of the Davis family, of course, but it didn't take the papers long to find out about the sudden and suspicious death of Jenny's sister, Elizabeth Brigham. Serial murders sold papers. Female killers sold papers. Put the two together, and you got the familiar feeding frenzy of the media. Boy, even back then they had the media pegged. There was in-depth analysis of Jenny's breakfast habits. The fact that she had nothing but coffee for breakfast was clearly a sign of deviance. I think that's a joke. I think there was baseless speculation that she was a morphine addict started by our good buddy Ormel Brigham himself. Jenny's only comment was that she wished the papers would not mention her, but of course she was never going to get her wish. And free of all legal shackles, the papers were able to declare her guilt without a shadow of a doubt. So here's another interesting thing. She doesn't want the press. Most serial killers do want the press. They want to get noticed. They want the glory. They want the publicity. Killers like her, and there's been some others, don't want to be in the press because it would interfere with what they're doing.
Yeah.
So
since she was doing everything undetected.
Yeah, so she's a little bit different in that way to other serial killers. Like, if you get publicized or you send letters to the press, it's going to make your little fun hobby that you have there a little hard to enjoy. The courts, on the other hand, were not so free, and proving Jenny's guilt was surprisingly problematic, given that she was guilty. Her defense had two big boons at the start. The first was the recent death of natural causes of the Davis family doctor, Leonard Latter. This meant that Jenny could claim that this evidence would obviously have cleared her. The other was done to a faulty assumption by the prosecutors. They had initially arrested Jenny because they found arsenic in the corpse of Minnie Gibbs and of Georgina Gordon. But though Jenny may have poisoned Georgina with arsenic, she hadn't used it on Minnie. In fact, the arsenic came from the embalming fluid used by the local undertaker. Despite this, the prosecution continued to fixate on the idea that both women had been poisoned with arsenic, inadvertently undermining their own case. So you've got a lot of people sabotaging themselves in a way in this whole case. It's kind of wild. But then it was a newspaper interview with Captain Paul Gibbs that broke the case open and doomed Jenny. When a reporter from the Boston Journal asked him for his opinion about the arsenic found in the corpses, Captain Gibbs was surprised. He said, "I didn't think Jane Toppan would use anything as easily detected as arsenic." Wow. The captain, of course, knew that Jenny was far smarter and a more capable pharmacologist than the prosecutors were willing to admit. When he was asked what he thought she might have used, he suggested a mixture of morphine and atropine. Boy, finally, someone smart. Like Jenny, he knew that this would make the most common symptoms of the two poisons, contracting and expanding the pupil, and make it cancel each other out. He also pointed out that Jenny had owed the Davis family money, and that $500, which Alden had in his pocket when he died, had gone missing. Which $500 back then might as well have been thousands. In short, Captain Gibbs did more to build the prosecution case in one interview than the prosecutors done themselves. So
it needed to take somebody that actually understood what would what type of drugs and things would cause things.
But the fact he did it in one interview was, this guy was.
Well, all these people going around, suspecting this, suspecting that. They needed someone who understood, like he did, something undetected, something like these two things, which.
Well, also, people defending her because they just couldn't believe that she would do something like this. So.
And someone knew what those drugs were, and somebody that knew how smart she was and what she knew. She knew what she was doing.
Yeah. So they came and said, "Oh yeah, all she could do was this," and it's like, "Oh, so you're telling us the woman's crazy? Oh yeah, she's batshit nuts." With this motive set out, the paper soon found more and more evidence of Jenny's sticky fingers down through the years, as well as the mysterious deaths that benefited her financially. So, that's pretty much saying there was a sexual thrill that she got out of it that she wanted to achieve, but also, she was after the buck as well. Myra Connors, for example, was soon being laid... at her feet. It was the Boston Herald that got the next big scoop, though, when it got a hold of a woman named Jeanette Snow. That's a pretty name. Jeanette was Jenny's cousin, or rather, Jeanette was Nora Kelly's cousin. Through her, the history of Kelly the Crack and her childhood mistreatment, along with Jenny's birth sister Nellie having ended up in an insane asylum, seemed to confirm what many newspapers had already suggested, that Jane Toppan was not just an opportunistic poisoner after material gain, but that she was in fact dangerously insane. Pretty much, this woman is two things. She's a gold digger and she's crazy. The idea of examining Jenny's sanity rather than prosecuting her became more palatable to the state day by day. Her wealthy Boston clientele, though she those she hadn't murdered were writing letters and using their influence to support her, as none of them could believe her guilty. In addition, the case was being charged with, of course, with the death of Minnie Gibbs, was a lot more difficult to prove than they had thought. And then there was a breakthrough. Cha-ching, there's always a breakthrough. The inquest of Georgina and Minnie proved that Captain Gibbs had proved what Captain Gibbs had suspected, that Minnie had been murdered with a mixture of atropine and morphine. The method pointed to a trained medical professional, putting Jenny right in the frame. And though they hadn't been able to show any evidence of Jenny buying arsenic, as soon as they started looking into her purchases of morphine, they hit the jackpot. In fact, they had more than enough evidence to go to trial. So, yeah, her past is pretty much catching up to her.
Quickly.
Yeah, really quickly. The original date for Jenny's trial was April of 1902, but with this evidence in hand, the prosecutors decided to ask for a special grand jury session to be convened in December of 1901. So this jump-started it. This was done, and before the prosecution had finished presenting their case, the jury indicated her for indicted her for trial. But the trial never took place. Jeannie's court appointed attorney Fred Bixby, and the district attorney agreed that neither wanted to deal with the insanity defense in court with a parade of expert witnesses for each side. Instead, they agreed to appoint a panel of eminent psychiatrists to examine Jenny, and pretty much that's kind of what they do now, pretty much, and to reach a conclusion that would stand up on its own in court. So, in March of 1902, three men, Dr. Henry Stedman, Dr. George Jelly, and Dr. Hosie Quimby, golly, what names,
Wow.
began their exploration of Jenny's psyche. At first, Jenny was suspicious of the doctors, but soon her natural chatty nature reasserted itself and she opened up to them. They quickly picked up on her pathological addiction to lying, but the doctors were experienced enough to push past that. Eventually, despite her not guilty plea at the arraignment, Jenny confessed to the murders. And to other murders, with a degree of calmness and utter lack of remorse that chilled these men, experienced insanity experts, to the bone. When she revealed her habit of getting into bed with her victims and the sexual thrill she got from watching them die, it was unlike anything they had ever encountered in their previous experience. So there was these rules back then that pretty much stated she wouldn't be entitled to an insanity defense. And she knew because she obviously knew what she was doing was wrong, even though she seemed incapable of saying why. Nonetheless, these doctors unanimously declared her morally insane, which is a term used for psychopathy at the time, and that she was unfit to stand trial, but would never recover from her illness. So, as they said, she was calm. She had no remorse. She just talked about it like it was nothing. This is an example of serial killers without a conscience, without no problem of what they're doing. Which is really off-putting, because, you would expect someone who's had to kill someone either out of self-defense or something like that to, be crying, to be shaking, to be panicking. But if you have someone just tell you, oh yeah, I poisoned this person, I watched with delight as they snuffed their life out and just laid there next to him and caressed them and just say like it was nothing, like it was like cuddling with your lover or something. It's like, what the hell? What's wrong with you? It's wild. Though there was technically no need for a trial following this, the state attorney general decided to hold one anyway in order to avoid establishing the precedent that a medical decision like this did not require jury approval. By the time the trial took place, enough of the report on Jenny's sanity had leaked out that she was regarded as the greatest monster in American history. A serial killer had never been prosecuted in America before, at least not one recognized as such. Almost everyone recognized trial as a formality, including Jenny herself. She was smiling and chatting with her lawyer during the single day that it took the jury to agree that she should be sent to a mental institution for the rest of her life. Perhaps the most decisive piece of evidence was when Dr. Stedman was asked what reason Jenny had given for poisoning Minnie Gibbs, and he replied, to cause death. It was only after the trial that Jenny's attorney revealed the shocking truth that Jenny had confessed to him when he became her attorney 6 months earlier. The 11 deaths that the police were investigating were only the tip of the iceberg. She told him how she had begun her career in murder 14 years earlier at nursing college, and in that time she estimated that she had killed 31 people. Only the Attorney General knew of Jenny's confession before the trial, which is why he had agreed to appoint the panel of experts. Those experts were themselves utterly shocked by this revelation, and the press, predictably, went wild. So yeah, it was probably in one of those confessions where she said her ambition was to kill more helpless people than any man or woman who had ever lived. The Boston Globe said that she was the greatest criminal in the country. The Boston Post had a page one story comparing Jenny to the greatest prisoners in history. They confidently asserted, incorrectly as it turned out, that she would be one of the most noted poisoners the world has ever known. A few days after the trial, the New York Journal published her terrible confession, and giving evidence at the trial, the psychiatrist had glossed over the more lurid details. The journal went into them in graphic detail, though the confession was almost certainly written by one of her staff writers. It still stuck mostly to the facts, and those facts painted Jenny as an even greater monster than anyone had suspected. At Taunton State Hospital, Jenny was, to all appearances, an example, like a great patient. Given the state of psychiatry at the time, a lunatic asylum was a deeply unpleasant place, but a patient apparently in full possession of their faculties, like Jenny, was enough of a rarity that she was almost a favorite of the staff by default. In fact, during her initial few years at the asylum, Jenny quite enjoyed it. However, after a while, the old adage that nothing would send someone crazier than that being in an asylum seemed to take effect. In fact, Jenny may have been on a downward slope for some time, but the asylum certainly didn't help. One well-known story is that she would call someone was walking by her room, she would call them in, and she was quoted as saying, "Get some morphine, dearie, and we'll go out into the ward." And then with a chilling smile, she would say, "You and I will have a lot of fun seeing them die." Yeah.
God.
Yeah. She developed manic depression, which led to her taking increasingly bizarre notions, such as the idea of resuming her birth name and becoming a nun. By 1904, she became so paranoid that she refused to eat anything for fear it would be poisoned, an ironic symptom that led to a new rash of press coverage of her case. The articles were predictably gloating in nature, with the usual journalistic glee and the suffering of those they considered deserving of it. They happily contemplated her death and the end of their twisted morality play, but she didn't die. Jane Toppan finally passed away in 1938, 81 years old and still imprisoned in Taunton. By the end, she was just another inmate, and though her death did prompt a new wave of interest, with front-page stories in the Boston newspapers and an obituary in the New York Times, nowadays she doesn't have anywhere near the notoriety you might expect. A few biographies, and a role as one of the killers delivering monologues in Ann Birdham's play Murderess. That's about it. Perhaps it's a subconscious act of repression that keeps her obscure. Perhaps we just don't want to think that when we place our lives in other people's hands, We don't really know who that person really is. If we spent too long thinking that the friendly nurse on our ward might be a Jolly Jane, then nobody in a hospital would ever dare sleep again.
Yeah.
So, yeah, as I said at the beginning, she's not as well known as other serial killers. She's not even mentioned much in the list of serial poisoners. She's just not listed that much. Now, there is a theory. It's an old theory that's not really given much weight anymore, that people seem to group her with, and that is the concept of the bad seed. Pretty much the offspring inheriting evil from the parents and it being passed down. There was actually a movie, I think in the 70s, called Bad Seed, and apparently it was inspired by Topin's story. It's about a little girl named Rhoda who had inherited evil from her parents, and it's killing people pretty much. Of course, psychology and all that has grown since then. We don't believe in that. Now, could there have been... There was obviously a history of mental illness in the family. Could it have passed to her? Yes, but here's the thing, though. She didn't, it seems like she had a psychotic breakdown, but it didn't happen until she really got into the asylum.
Yeah.
So, it was definitely, she got a sexual thrill out of it, like other serial killers, so that was a definite reason why that might have been the big thing behind it. Now, of course, a few of them, financial gain was there, revenge, like with her adoptive sister, even though her adoptive sister was very, very favorite, liked her a lot. It just seems at the heart, she was insane. She just was crazy. I mean, she's... Like I said, almost all serial killers have a sexual reason for doing what they do. They get a sexual thrill out of it. Whether it's just fulfilling a need or things like that. It definitely seems like with her, it was fulfilling a need that she had. Could it have something to do with her family's history of mental illness? Yeah, it could be. Is her getting jilted at the altar the real driving force behind it?
Sure, it added to it.
I'm sure it added to it, because apparently, like I said, she was quoted as saying if she had gotten married and had kids, she might not have killed all these people. But as it said, she was like a pathological liar as well, so you can't really believe anything she said. So I don't know, she could have definitely had a more, it seems like there for a while she was on the road to doing better, but then again, she was killing people while she was still a student, so I don't know. I don't think we'll ever fully know what exactly was going on there, because it's such an old case, and they just didn't keep track of stuff back then like they did. 31 people's a lot of people, but it's good that they did catch her before she could do it more, and it's good that she stayed in a mental institution for the rest of her life until she passed away.
I thought the 31 people was what she killed before.
No, it was all together. Because originally they were only investigating her for 11, but she said that since she killed those people when she was in school and all that, that it was up to 31. And that's the official body count for her. It's 31. So yeah, probably. I just don't know what it is. But like I said, when I read other serial killer cases like Dahmer, like Bundy, and stuff like that, I guess because they're talked about so much, you just kind of get about them.
Yeah.
But her case, I don't know why, but I just it creeps me out. It gives me goosebumps. It really does. It's almost like she was several. She had several motives, like the sexual thrill, the financial gain, the revenge, and then just pure insanity. Like it's just she obviously didn't have a conscience.
No.
But like I also said, unlike other serial killers, she didn't want the world to know what she was doing.
Of course, because she knew at some point it'd catch up with her, and she wouldn't be able to have her fun anymore.
And it eventually did. But it's like the program that I own says, publicity would be bad for business in the business of killing. Now, like most serial killers, they don't care. If they get publicity, they get it. And there's other ones who drive on it, like BTK and the Zodiac Killer. They all sent letters to the press, to the police. Even Jack the Ripper sent letters to the police. So some of them do want the publicity. They want to gloat and all that because it makes them feel good about themselves. Because in reality, they're not that. So yeah, this is one of those few cases that it's just like I can't really. I don't want to just up and say she's just 100% crazy because she really had other motives behind all this. But it's such an old case. I don't think we'll ever have an official thing. I mean, nobody who was probably even involved in this case is alive anymore. So it'll just be one of those cases where we can only speculate. So, at the end of the day, I'd say yes, insanity, some financial gain, sexual gratification, and maybe a little bit of getting back at society for how she felt she was treated. So yeah. So, like I said, the article that this was all from will be in the description because we want to leave credit where credit is due. If you guys enjoyed the video, please hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, hit that notification bell. Check the description for other stuff like our Twitters, our Etsy store, our Square store, our Patreon, and all that good stuff. Like I said, I'm going to be getting a new computer soon, so expect horror Let's Plays and other games in general because, like I said, as much as I paid for this computer, it should play almost anything I want to play. More cosplay stuff from Jess is going to be coming up soon, including a review. Sorry this episode was a little late. We've been doing other things in our isolation, but episode 5 will hopefully be out faster than this one was. But we don't know what the topic is yet. I'll announce on Twitter whenever we decide what the next topic is, whenever it does. So follow my Twitter. I usually put polls on there of what games I'm going to play next or what video ideas I have or anything like that. And you want to plug anything? Oh, and I did a video game haul video. Go watch that. So yeah, this is Kanan.
This is Jesse.
And this was Mysterious Darkness. We hope you enjoyed it. Hope you guys sleep well. And we will see you in the next one. See ya.
Bye.